It can be easy to overlook the used graphics card market. Yeah, Greg's gonna preach this again, but I get it. You don't trust used graphics cards because you have no idea what condition those cards were in, apart from the pictures you see in ads and whatever the seller lists in the description, which can be arguably sketchy. But much like the discussion we had in this video right here, I want to do a similar thing with AMD this time, not NVIDIA, assess the best value graphics cards for gamers at various price points. 100 US dollars, 250 USD, and 400 USD. Let's get started. Meet Deepcool's Castle 240EX all-in-one liquid cooler sporting a beautiful yet functional design. Fans are optimized for silent operation and static pressure. The new dual-chamber, three-phase pump ensures strength and reliability. The block's RGB is diffused better than ever, and the logo cap is now removable, customizable, and rotatable. This is honestly my favorite part. And it's all packaged with Deepcool's patented anti-leak tech, which we got to see live in action at Computex 2019. Check out the video description for more details. So the three cards we'll be using to represent these price points are the MSI RX 580 Gaming X. This is the 8GB variant, but a 4GB variant at 1080p will typically do just fine. The Power Color Vega 56 Red Dragon, that's this beefy thing right here. Actually, funny enough, the PCB stops here. The rest of this is just a cooler. And the Gigabyte RX 5700 XT Gaming OC. The names, yeah, are a bit all over the place, but performance scales beautifully between the three. You see, what we essentially have here are three categories of gameplay. We have mid to high 1080p, well, I would say high to mid 1440p, and mid to high 1440p gameplay. Now, that's not to say that the RX 580 isn't capable of 1440p gaming. I have used one specifically for 1440p, and it runs just fine. But you'll be able to bump in-game settings a bit more, obviously, in the lower resolution at the expense of fewer lost frames. It's a trade-off you'll have to weigh on your own, but I personally think that these cards are served best in the aforementioned ranges of resolutions. I also wouldn't recommend any of these cards for AAA 4K gaming unless you're outright, interested in, increasing resolution for the sake of seeing a game that looks less beautiful because you have to drop in-game settings. To me, that just doesn't make any sense, but yeah, again, that's just my opinion. Anyway, our test bench is exactly the same as has been in previous graphics card reviews. Core i5-8600K, 16 gigs of DDR4, an MSI Z370 motherboard, yada, yada, yada. Both the CPU and GPU in each set of tests were set to stock configurations, by the way. No manual overclocks, no undervolting, none of that. I stress that in particular because our Vega 56 card here could benefit quite a bit from an undervolt, first off, increased power limits, and even memory OCs if you're into doing some serious tinkering. There are several variables that don't expect many people to play with, although you should consider those strongly if you buy a Vega card. I'm not gonna bother because then we'll have to tweak the other two cards, and then you always have people complaining, why aren't you just running them with the stock out-of-box configs? No one's ever, I shouldn't say that. You can't please everybody. You can please some people, but you can't please everyone. I just, as a rule of thumb, tend to test things as they come out of the box. And the argument that I could make for not overclocking and undervolting Vega is that, well, this should have been done from the get-go. So there you go. And to be honest, much of what you'll see here in these graphs is to be expected. The RX 580, which in this case, again, is the 8GB variant, just want to stress that, of course, comes dead last in practically every test here, save power draw and potentially sound. It really depends on the AIB. But in terms of raw compute power, it isn't anything exceptional, and it's not supposed to be. That's okay. For the price of roughly 100 USD on the used market, sometimes even less than that, it's a heck of a bargain for 1080p gaming. Recommended CPUs for this card, in my opinion, by the way, would be something like Ryzen 3 or Ryzen 5, and Core i3s and Core i5s. It appears to handle DX12 titles just fine, despite its age, and maintains healthy 1% and 0.1% lows. As for the Vega 56 card, I truly believe this is one of the best cards in its price range. That is, assuming you can find one for 200 USD or thereabouts. GTX 1070s from the green team sell for about this price as well on eBay, and they're generally much cooler and quieter at a similar level of performance. It obviously depends on the game and the rest of your components, but ultimately it's your decision. If I had to break it down though, this is a touchy subject, I'm just gonna tell you straight up how I feel about it based on the research that I've done and the testing I've done in-house. If they're both about the same price, it's a toss-up. Just make sure you stay away from blower style coolers, more specifically Vega blower style coolers, and for obvious reasons, right? They run very hot and loud. But if it's an AIB 56, it's probably going to cost upwards of 250 to 300 USD, in which case I would almost always buy a $200 or so 1070 instead. Even if it's the slightly worse card in the games you play, in my opinion, the extra 50 or $100 saved can be used for other things in your system. You could make that, you could stretch that money a lot more is what I'm trying to say. So if you can find a card like this beefy power color AIB, then I recommend not paying any more than about $250 for it. That's my take. If it's about $300, at that point you might as well buy a 5700. And if it's any more expensive than that, then 5700 XT. Speaking of which, why would you buy this card? Well, I've already got a few videos covering 5700 XTs, different variants, the Gigabyte Gaming OC here, the Red Devil, the Evoke. They're all great in their own ways, except maybe for the Evoke from the factory. But the problem in this context is that you can't really buy these used yet, with a few exceptions. And it's an unfortunate side effect and reality of working with cards fresh off of a launch. There just aren't many being sold in the used market because people just bought these, right? But it doesn't mean you should totally write off this card if you're in for a deal. The 5700 XT is AMD's latest attempt at challenging NVIDIA's status quo in the 1440p space. I mean, sure, right? We don't have 4K competitors yet from the red team, and that kind of sucks. But we know one's on the horizon, or likely on the horizon, I should say. We also expect lower-end Navi cards to hit the shelves before Christmas, so that could potentially shake things up even more down low. It might even just totally make 580s irrelevant, who knows, or it might drive 580 prices down even further, although I can't imagine them going much lower than about 60 or 80 bucks. Wow, that would be insane to get RX 580 performance for $50 or $60. I really hope low-end Navi comes out pretty soon. But anyway, case in point, if you're looking for a rock-solid 1440p gamer, the 5700 XT is it. It packs a heck of a punch for the price, and even makes me struggle to recommend comparable NVIDIA cards. I know, right? I'm supposed to be the NVIDIA shill, and I'm recommending the AMD card instead. Now, assuming prices remain in the upper 400s, I must confess though, my favorite card of this bunch is the RX 580. It's technically a flashed RX 480 if I'm being honest, but you won't likely notice. This card was actually used to mine cryptocurrency a few months ago. I know, right? This is a stigma I've seen circulate around the PC gaming community. We've addressed it in a separate video, but I want to talk about it in this one as well. Oh, it's a mining card. That's bad. Stay away. But is that really true? I mean, sure, some of these are worked pretty hard, and a lot of them run 24/7, but that's what they were designed to do, work hard. And not all cards endure the same degrees of stress. A great Reddit post by user KeySmash outlines the various scenarios graphics cards are subjected to in the mining environment. For example, Ethereum mining is bottlenecked by memory bandwidth on Polaris cards, not the CPU, or well, actually I should say the GPU in this case. So miners often underclock and undervolt the CPU, or I said it again, the GPU, we're talking about just the card here, they'll undervolt the GPU to save power. They do in turn though typically overclock memory, but it's likely a trade-off that will go unnoticed by a second-hand buyer unless the card was flashed with some weird mining BIOS and not reverted back to stock. I know this isn't a large sample size by any means, but I've purchased a little over about half a dozen Polaris cards over the past year or so. All of them were mining cards, at least I had that suspicion, and none of them have had any issues. Granted, they aren't running 24/7 anymore, but the fact remains that I've had a 100% success rate with mine cards to date on eBay. And worst case, assuming you are shopping on eBay, the buyer protection guarantee will almost always have you covered. It's one of the reasons why I recommend the site so often. eBay has a controversial habit, let's say, of heavily favoring and protecting buyers over sellers. As someone who's been on both sides of this equation, I can attest to it. It's better to be the buyer, and you'll almost always be covered if something goes wrong. So yeah, the risk might be a bit higher. The failure rates, I mean, from the time of purchase might be a bit higher, but it's a risk I'm personally willing to take to save a ton of money. So I say all that to say this, don't be afraid to dabble in the used market. If the 5700 XT is a bit too far out of reach given your budget constraints, and right now we only have kind of like mid-range Navi cards, and I totally understand, consider a used card in the $100 to $200 price range. 4 gig 570s, for example, and we found it for even less than $100 in some cases. So it really all depends on when and where you look. If you're gonna buy in person, do your best to test the card prior to handing over the cash. And if you're buying on eBay, pick the seller with the best deal, the best rep, decent pictures, and a healthy description of use. Even if it's disclosed that the card has been mined with, it's no reason to reject the card altogether and move on to another listing. Give it a chance, especially if it's priced competitively. And once you get a hold of that used card, give it a thorough cleaning. I actually haven't given this one a thorough cleaning. I use the good old air duster, but yeah, I think I'm gonna take this one apart and really clean it. Maybe in a separate video, be some nice tech porn for you guys. In before demonetization, GG YouTube. Usually the argument for not tearing down your card is that you'll lose your warranty if you do, but we can assume that if you buy a card on the used market, your warranty is probably forfeit anyway. But let's be honest, how many graphics cards legit just straight up die from use? I have not run into the issue ever. I killed a couple graphics cards by installing water blocks on them. I guess I bent the PCBs too much and the GPU becomes deballed from the PCB. That's just user error. That's my fault. But you know, when you have a card running in your system, even 24/7, how many of those just randomly die? You might have a fan die, and that's a fair argument. It's a moving part, right? It's pretty easy for this thing to die. But usually you can find these replacements on eBay and elsewhere for like 10 to 15 bucks. They might come from China, might take a while to get here, but they're very easy replacements. Literally in this case, what, 3 screws? To me, it's not a strong excuse against. It's the same with CPUs, by the way. How many CPUs do you know just randomly die? Never had that happen before. Failure rates past the factory are relatively low, so again, I don't think you'll have much to worry about. Then again, if you're that concerned, there are still new Polaris and Vega cards on the market, albeit at pretty high prices and in trace amounts. And yeah, you've still always got Navi if you're willing to fork out a bit more cash for great performance across the board. Either Navi or RTX 2070, not the Super. I think the Super is marginally better performance over the 2070 regular, non-Super in most cases, for around 50 to 100 bucks more. If you can find an RTX 2070 for $400, that's a pretty compelling offer. Remember, those typically consume less power and run quieter, although these AIBs, these 5700 XT AIBs are doing pretty darn good. I'm really impressed with the Gigabyte card. We actually reviewed this one up here if you want to check it out. But yeah, most of them have been good. The Evoke was a questionable one, but it's getting really tough to recommend one over the other. I think that's a good thing, ultimately. If I have to struggle to choose one brand over another, and we're not just talking, you know, Gigabyte versus Zotac or Asus versus EVGA. I'm talking NVIDIA versus AMD, like the big boy manufacturers, right, of these fabs. Those are the arguments and the conversations that I'm glad we get to have again. And it's okay to be to be choosy. It's okay to be picky. It's actually a privilege to be picky, because in many places people can't be picky. They're just forced to buy one thing because that's the only product offered in their market. So be thankful that things are a lot more competitive now. And I expect they'll only continue to be more and more competitive as time progresses. At least that's what I hope, but we'll see. You never know. You just never know with tariffs and everything else. No idea what's going to happen. If you guys like this video, thumbs up. I appreciate that. Click that red subscribe button. Become a Floatplane subscriber. You can become a channel member. Plenty of things to get involved. You can join our public Discord channel. It's totally free. We share that with Brian over at Tech Yes City. And yeah, we'll see you guys on the next one. This is Science Studio. Thanks for watching, and thanks for benchmarking with us.